Hi.
Hi.
This looks like an electric chair I'm sitting in. Oh my God, at least mine doesn't have straps.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Spooky Empire's Ultimate Horror Weekend. My name is George Van Orsdell, and I have the extreme pleasure of introducing the daughter of the one and only king of monsters and one of my all-time favorites, Sara Karloff, Sara Karloff. Now, this is going to be an open forum, question and answer session. I'll ask some questions. If you guys have questions, feel free, and he'll run the microphone. So if anyone has any questions to start off with, feel free, raise your hand. We'll pass the microphone around. There we go.
How was it growing up as a child when your father played in the horror films of the time back then?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand.
I know, I've got laryngitis.
The question was, how was it growing up having a father as an actor in horror films? Is that was the question was?
Yes. It was wonderful because my father didn't bring his work home.
Oh, okay. So did you get to see him in his role?
I got to see him quite a lot, yes. He was a very modest man, and he didn't talk about himself, and he didn't talk about his career, and he was a wonderful listener, so that he brought out the best in those around him. But the really important thing was he did not bring his career or his work home, and he never came home and scared me in the night.
Now, as many of us already know, your father loved children and did numerous things for children, such as recorded records with the children's stories, and also, you know, he was in he played Captain Hook, which I've seen pictures of, and I think he's absolutely wonderful. And did you ever get to see him perform as Captain Hook on stage?
My father, I went to visit my father when he was in Peter Pan. He played Mr. Darling and Captain Hook. And he arranged for me to see the play over a week's time. And I saw it from the wings, and I saw it from backstage, and I saw it from out front. And at the end of the week's time, he said, I can tell that you don't have the fire in the belly, which is a theater term, whether or not you really have the passion to be in the theater. He said, I can tell that you don't have the fire in the belly. You paid more attention to Nana the dog than you did to me. But he loved me in Peter Pan because he enjoyed working with kids. Most actors don't like to work with either animals or children because they upstage them in every scene. But my father really enjoyed working with the 7 Lost Boys. And years later, I had the opportunity to meet one of the Lost Boys. His name was Richard Knox. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. But Richard told me what a wonderful time he had working with my father. So it was a great pleasure for me to get to know Richard and understand what it was like to work in a play with my father. And he said my father was just the consummate professional, but just so kind and thoughtful to all his fellow actors.
Now, speaking of children and your father, there's a story that I've heard, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but it regards during the filming of Frankenstein, Marilyn Harris, the little girl who played Maria. There's a little story that goes along with that, where they were scared or concerned about her being scared seeing your dad in the makeup. Now, is there a little story that goes with that?
Why don't you tell him?
Well, basically, I heard that the film crew and the director, everyone was concerned as to whether she was going to be scared or not. But apparently, one day when they were getting ready to drive over to the set, she actually looked at your dad and said, "Can I ride with you in the car?" And he said, "You certainly may."
That's true. My father always felt that youngsters, instead of being afraid of the creature, as he preferred to call the monster, he preferred to call the creature, he felt that youngsters got it. They understood that the creature was the victim and not the perpetrator, and that it was more adults who were afraid of the creature than youngsters, and that they really identified more with the plight of the creature. And the youngsters really weren't afraid of him in the makeup.
Yeah, I have two young nephews that absolutely love Frankenstein, and they can watch it over and over. And
they seem to get it.
Yeah, they love it. They love it. Now, you never got the acting bug, did you?
No.
No. Although you did do a voiceover for a movie, Deader Country.
Well, it wasn't a voiceover. It was an off-stage voice, and I had two shrewish lines that I hope end up on the cutting room floor.
And the film has yet to be released, correct?
I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. Okay. Now, you have the distinction of sharing a birthday with your father.
I do.
Right? Now, I've read that during the filming of Son of Frankenstein, your father received a phone call stating that you were being born, and he rushed to the hospital in complete Frankenstein makeup. Now, is this true?
That's an urban legend.
Is it now? Okay.
Do you really think they let him off the set in that garb?
That would be quite a shock to the nurses at the hospital.
There is a photograph of my father and a nurse holding me.
Oh, okay.
So I think that would dispel that urban legend. They would not allow him. I mean, he couldn't even fit in a car to drive.
Does anyone else have any questions out there in the crowd? There he goes. Gentleman in the back. He's got a microphone for you.
Hi, Sarah. Nice to meet you. What was the true relationship with Bela Lugosi and your father? There's been a lot of talk over the years that, they didn't get along, and, with Bela not taking the Frankenstein role and his downward side to his career, were they friendly? Did they get along, or what was the story on that?
Bela and I always take a bet whether or not we can make it through one of these without someone asking that question. And we have to take turns who gets the losing side, because the losing side is the one that bets that crust and won't be asked. It's always asked. It was a lot of media hype, a lot of studio hype. They made 7 films together. They had a lot of professional respect for one another, but they didn't socialize together. There was no personal animosity between them. Bela was Hungarian, and he had personal interests of his own, both because of his Hungarian background and simply because he had his own personal interests. My father had a British background and his own personal interests, such as cricket and gardening and reading, and they simply pursued their own personal interests offset. Today you will find the same thing. Actors who spend months together on a set will probably not see one another again for perhaps forever if they don't make another movie together, or until the next time they make a movie. They didn't socialize together because their personal interests were different, but there was no personal animosity. They had a great deal of professional respect for one another.
Since we're on the topic of Boris and Bela, Warner Brothers just released the 4-film box set of the Karloff Lugosi collection, featuring a couple of great films, The Walking Dead being one of the classics. And you'll find out, which is one of my personal favorites. I absolutely love that film. Do you know of any upcoming releases of your father's films that haven't been released yet, such as The Lost Patrol?
I would be the last one that Universal would tell.
Oh, really? Okay.
However, I do know that my father's series, Thriller, is about to be released. And that's a question I'm often asked by his fans. And I get a lot of emails from my father's fans asking, is there anything I can do? And the answer is always no, but anything that I can do to encourage the release of that television series. It was a wonderful series, and it is about to be released, and people are absolutely delighted that it's forthcoming. And I had nothing to do with it. I wish I could, but it is about to be released.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, because I actually used to watch that on reruns, and it really was a great show. It really was a great show. Going back to the Walking Dead, your dad was great at playing characters that had compassion and tragic characters, such as the Frankenstein monster, which a lot of people saw as a monster, but especially in later versions of the creature. But your father played it with such compassion, and again in The Walking Dead, his the main character was played with as a very tragic figure, and I've loved that about your father, that he was able to do the scary parts, but he was also able to play the intelligent and compassionate, tragic, and he was just an incredibly diverse actor.
Thank you. I think a really good actor, a professional, as my father was, brings a lot of himself to any role. And my father really was a very gentle soul, a lovely human being, very soft-spoken, very witty, very funny man in and of himself. He was very articulate, very well-read, and very compassionate, very empathetic. So I think that came through in a lot of his films, including Frankenstein. And I think that that certainly gave the long legs to many of his portrayals. Heaven knows a lot of the films he did later on were not remarkably wonderful. A lot of the scripts were pretty bad, and a lot of the films were thrown together in haste. But I'm told from the fans that they feel that his particular roles in some of the very bad films that he did later on, even they could tell that he gave his very best to each role that he did. And I think that's because of his being a consummate professional, and he really genuinely felt that he was so lucky to be able to work right up until the end. And that's exactly what he wanted to do. He was fortunate enough to do it.
One of my favorite films that your father made was a film called Targets.
That's my favorite film.
I absolutely love that film because his character is basically based on boards.
An aging horror film star, and what unique casting.
Exactly, he played the part beautifully because he was playing himself. It's excellent.
It's a good film if you haven't seen it. It was pulled out of the theaters prematurely because it came into the theaters at the same time as the assassinations of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And the film was about a sniper. And so it had a very short theater life, but it's well worth renting if you haven't seen it. And it was Peter Bogdanovich's first film where he directed and wrote it and actually acted in it himself.
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen Targets, you should definitely go out. It's not a horror movie, as Sarah said. It's a film about a sniper, but Sara Karloff is absolutely brilliant in the movie, as always. So, as we all know, in Hollywood, you cannot work in Hollywood without being a part of the Screen Actors Guild. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but your father was actually a founding member of the Screen Actors Guild. How did that come about?
Well, my father's card number is number 9, and he was one of the original 10 founding members in 1933. And he, along with the other founding members, felt that it was their obligation to give back to their profession and to protect, develop a method of protecting those actors who had not yet reached a point in their careers to speak out against some of the gross injustices that were happening to their fellow actors and that they themselves had experienced before they became quote-unquote stars. My father had worked 18, 19, 20-hour days at the hands of the all-powerful studio bosses. And the contract actors were essentially nothing more than a piece of meat to the studios. And these men who formed the Screen Actors Guild were forming a union in opposition to the studios, and they were putting their careers on the line, and it was really very dangerous. My mother told me that they would park their cars blocks away from one another's houses and walk to the meetings at one another's homes. She also told me that when they would be attending a party, they dance by one another on the dance floor and whisper, "Meeting Tuesday night at such and so's home," and dance right on by. It was really very hush-hush, very dangerous to their careers. Not unlike, really, the McCarthy era. It was a union they were forming, and it was very important that they were successful in forming the Screen Actors Guild. Perhaps people have varying opinions of the value and power that unions hold today, but at that time, actors were really mistreated. And the working conditions were horrible, the long hours, the pay scale, the auditioning on the casting room couch that is written about. All the protections that exist today and perhaps are abused today in reverse, there were no protections for the actors. And the forming of the Guild was something that my father did, and he was very proud of his participation in it. And then he served on the board directly as a mediating capacity for many years. And he never spoke about it publicly, but it was something. He had a gold card, life membership, and he was very quiet about it. But it was, I know personally, something he's very proud of.
Now, Boris did some films with Vincent Price and Peter Lorre, which I love. The Raven, Comedy and Terrors. How close were they? Were they close friends, or was it strictly a professional relationship?
Oh, Vincent and my dad were very good friends. Vincent used to carry me around on his shoulders when I was a little girl. They were good friends, and Basil Rathbone. And those old men, when they made those films, they had such a good time spoofing their own boogeyman images, and they drove the director crazy. I mean, they poked fun at one another. They played practical jokes on one another when they made the Comedy of Terrors and the Raven. They had such a good time. I mean, they were so amazed they lived so long and they were still working, and somebody wanted to direct them. And so they really had a good time. And I had the fortunate opportunity to visit both sets. It was a madhouse, and it was lovely to see them enjoying their iconic persona to the point that they could turn it around and spoof their own boogeyman images on film and each other on the set. It was delightful.
Do you have any specific on-set stories while you were there that are endearing to you?
No, just the overall.
Just the overall experience.
Just the overall experience, and just the atmosphere on the set, and watching these men who had come up through the ranks and survived it all, and whose careers have had such long legs thanks to the fans. It was just delightful.
Now, this is a tough question, I'm sure, because if someone asked me this, I wouldn't be able to answer it. Out of all the roles your dad played, do you have a favorite?
Oh, probably Target.
Target, definitely.
Yeah, he has a soliloquy towards the end of the film, and I can't remember exactly how old my dad was, but when he did the film, but he did it in one take, and when he did it, when he was finished, the entire crew broke out in applause. And what a lovely exit line for my father. It wasn't literally his last film, but it was his last film of merit, and a film he really enjoyed making. And it was a lovely exit line for him to get the accolades of the people with whom he was working.
Now, a lot of people don't know this. I guess the true fans always know this stuff.
They know more than I do.
Yeah, they do, sometimes.
Always.
Your father made approximately 80 films before he even was cast for the Frankenstein monster.
That's right. It was about his 81st film, and hardly anyone had seen the first 80.
Are most of those films lost now?
Oh, I think a lot of the serials that he made, and a lot of the silent films that he made are lost or are collector's items. They're probably lost, yes.
That's unfortunate. It really is. Does anyone else have any questions? Gentleman in the back. The microphone man. That's all right. All the way in the back.
I was curious, what kind of relationship did your father have with directors like James Whale? And I believe he was an arsenic in old age too, wasn't he?
Yes, not in the film, in the play.
In the play. What was his, how did he enjoy that stage play, or there were these lesser known films like The Ape that he played in?
What sort of relationship did my father have with the directors
Or
with whom he worked?
like James Whale or other notable directors? What kind of
James
relationship?
Whale? Well, my father, when he did Frankenstein, was so grateful to have a job that he would take direction from a corner cop. He recognized he worked long and hard to get to that particular place, and he recognized the genius of James Whale. But nobody expected that film to be the success that it was. And he didn't get credit in the opening credits. He got a question mark. He did get credit in the rolling credits at the end, but he wasn't even invited to the premiere. So he was in hardly a position to criticize the director. As it turned out, it was a marriage made in heaven. James Whale, Jack Pierce's makeup, the treatment of Mary Shelley's story, Colin Clive, and my father's interpretation of the role. All of that was just a perfect marriage and made for the totally unexpected success of that film at that time. And then the fans from that point on have kept it and made it an iconic film. So he referred to James Whale as Jimmy. He was directed by him in all three of the Frankenstein films and had great respect for his talent.
Do we have any more questions out there? Yeah, one right here.
What is your favorite memory of your father?
Oh my. I have a lot of lovely memories of my father. I think my father was such a decent man, and he really. We had some friends one time. My parents had some friends, and they raised rabbits, and of course, as a little girl, I wanted a pet. At one time, my parents had 22 dogs. It wasn't as if we were petless, but I wanted a rabbit, and so my father was a man of such integrity, and he felt that if you gave a promise, you must keep your promise. And so he elicited from me that I would take care of my rabbit. If I were able to go and pick my own rabbit, I would take care of my rabbit. Totally, and of course, promise. I promised I would take care of my rabbit. I'd feed my rabbit, I'd clean the cage, I'd do this, I'd do that. Of course, I'd do anything to get my way. I was spoiled. And so he said, fine, and he took me to pick out my rabbit. And there were, as there always are, there are many baby rabbits from which to select mine, and I selected it. And on the way home, he asked me why I didn't pick the rabbit with the bent over ear. And I said, well, it had a broken ear, and I wanted a perfect rabbit. Why would I pick a rabbit with a broken ear? And he said, well, it needed more love than the other. Lesson number one. It said something about my father. So I take my rabbit home, but I never forgot that. I take my rabbit home. Of course, for the first 2 weeks, I took very good care of my rabbit, and as the weeks went on, I took less good care of my rabbit. I didn't feed it quite as often, or change its water, or clean its cage. And about 6 weeks after owning my rabbit, I went out one day, and my rabbit was gone. And I came running into the house crying that somebody had taken my rabbit. And my father said, yes, I took it back to a better home, where some other little girl will keep her word and take care of the rabbit. Lesson number 2. So my father taught me 2 lessons with 1 rabbit. That's my favorite story about my father.
It is an excellent story. I love that story. Does anyone have questions? Any more? Yeah, gentleman over here.
Hello, it's great to hear from you today. You mentioned before that your father never brought his work home, but I was just curious for you as a young girl when other kids would find out who your dad was. I mean, what was that like growing up, not in the home, but just when other people would find out that your dad was Frankenstein? Were they afraid to come to your house and stuff like that?
Well, no matter how old I may look up here today, I wasn't born when my father made Frankenstein. So I was born on the set of Son of Frankenstein, not on the set while he was making God, oh God. While he was on the set of Son of Frankenstein. But in Hollywood, Beverly Hills at that time, a famous name did not stand out. I went to school early years with a lot of famous kids, and so my schools were picked, so I went, and so it didn't stand. My name didn't stand out. After my parents were divorced, each remarried very happily, and each remarriage was of great longevity. And I moved to San Francisco. Then it was a different matter. I still went to a very small girls' school, but then my name stood out a lot more in San Francisco. But during my early years, it didn't stand out at all.
Do you have any other questions out there? No one is curious. Here we go. Gentleman with the Frankenstein shirt.
Nice shirt.
Yeah, I had a question about Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
I know your father had turned down playing Frankenstein because he didn't like the idea of them making fun of the creature. And I know later he did a couple of movies with Abbott and Costello. And I wondered if after seeing Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, if his opinion changed, or if he just, did the other movies because they weren't making fun of the monster.
My understanding was that my father decided to only play the Frankenstein monster 3 times because he felt that role had made such a pivotal difference to him, both personally and professionally. And after the 3rd film, he felt that both the scripts and the role, the monster was being made the brunt of bad scripts and bad jokes. And he really didn't want to partake in that. And also he was 44 when he made the first Frankenstein, and it was a very arduous role, as was the makeup and the wardrobe, and he had a bad back, and all of that may have also played into it. And so I have to assume, and that's what I'm doing, is assuming that that's why he didn't agree to do Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. He did, however, as you pointed out, make 2 films with Abbott and Costello. I have to assume that's why he didn't make the Abbott and Costello Frankenstein. Did that answer your question? Well, as I said, my father didn't bring his work home. He never talked about other actors. Didn't talk about the films that he was making or had made. He didn't talk about directors. If he ever thought something was exceptionally fine that he went to see, then of course that would be almost in the 3rd person. Then he would praise something or someone highly. I had the opportunity to meet George Kennedy not too long ago, and I remembered that my father had thought he was such a fine actor. And so I had the opportunity to tell Mr. Kennedy that, and it brought tears to his eyes. But that was something that I could give him because it was so rare that my father even spoke about other actors. But my father had always felt that he was such a fine actor. But it was rare that my father spoke of anyone in his profession. And so many of my father's friends were not even in the profession. So it's not unusual that I don't know what his opinion was of Abbott and Costello. I'm sure they were superb comedians, and I have no reason to doubt, to feel that my father thought anything but great admiration for their talent.
Now, you just mentioned that your dad never brought work home as far as speaking of directors or other actors' work. Did he ever mention films? Did he have any particular films that he liked, or was there one particular film that he really enjoyed?
Well, certainly he always acknowledged with gratitude the role of Frankenstein. And half-jokingly he referred, and only halfway joking, he referred to the monster or the creature as his best friend, for obvious reasons. It took him 20 years, 10 years in repertory theater in British Columbia and 10 years in inconsequential films in Hollywood before he got his overnight stardom. So he owed a great debt of gratitude to that role.
Now, your father also participated in 2 animation films. One, as we all know, is How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Indeed.
And the other one was Mad Monster Party.
Yes.
Did he ever mention how he felt working on those animation films, or is that part of the not bringing the work home?
No, actually, he called me the night that How the Grinch Stole Christmas was going to air and encouraged me to sit down with my kids and watch it. He loved doing that. And I'm sure he loved doing Mad Monster Party, but there was nothing specific I can recall his doing about that. But he was just delighted with How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And he did win a Grammy for that. And his agent on the biography that A&E did said that he was in England the night that my father was in England, the night that the Grammys were awarded, and my father won. So my agent, his agent, collected it for him. And when my father came over the next time and went to his agent's office, he gave my father the Grammy, and my father said it looks like a doorstop. And he took it and he put it over at his agent's door and said, you can use it as a doorstop. I now have that Grammy.
Did your father ever mention his relationship, or would you happen to know what his relationship was with the amazing Jack Pierce, one of Hollywood's first, or probably best at the time, makeup artists?
Oh, best in the world. My father said on film when they did This Is Your Life that he called Jack a genius and the best makeup man in the world, best makeup man in the business. Jack indeed was a genius.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. He definitely was.
And my father gave him full credit for creating the look. And they worked together, I believe, 2 weeks, because at that time Jack was head of the makeup department and could get 2 weeks to work on the makeup. And my father had a partial bridge that he suggested he could remove and make the indentation. And I think my father made some suggestions about the eyes or eyelids, but absolutely the rest of it was Jack Pierce's genius, creativity. And of course, they didn't have the prosthetics then that they use now. And it was 3.5, 4 hours every morning to put the makeup on, and almost that long to take it off. So it was an ordeal.
Now, you mentioned earlier about your father's back problems. Was that a problem he had prior to the filming of Frankenstein, or as a result of?
I think it was mainly a result of carrying Colin Clive up the back lot hill.
Do we have any other questions out there? I know we're getting close to yeah, we have a couple minutes.
Hello there.
Hello there, how are you? We had a long chat, so I've been quiet for a while, just listening, but fascinating to hear you talk about your father.
Thank you.
I was just curious, I know that every once in a great while, your father had something to do with a Frankenstein production. Obviously not Universal, but a Frankenstein production, like Frankenstein 1970 or something like that, 58, throughout. What was the last movie that he had anything to do with a Frankenstein production? I don't know.
Does anybody know?
Yeah, really.
I don't know. See, I told you.
Yeah, you told me. Well, it may have been Frankenstein 1970.
I would almost think so.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with that. Unless you want to count Mad Monster Party, which he didn't actually play Frankenstein, but I think he did. But that was an animated feature. But yeah, as far as a film, I believe he's right. Yeah, I think Frankenstein 1970 was.
When was the Route 66 done?
Oh, I think that was
in the early 60s, right?
That was done in 62.
Right. That sounds right.
So that would be the last.
Where he got together with Peter Lorre and
Yeah.
Lon Chaney Jr.
Lon Chaney Jr., right? And he even wore the makeup. I think that may have even been the last time that he wore.
See, I got the answer before you did, but I was given it. I would have to think that would be the last time.
Was he? I mean, he didn't grow to resent. I mean, having to do Frankenstein productions, you know, even all those years later, did he? I mean, it was still. I mean, he didn't resent it, right? I mean, it was still.
It was a gig.
It was a gig, like any other.
And they got together to do it, and they all agreed to do it. And they all looked awful doing it. And those old men didn't have as much fun doing it as the other old men had doing Comedy of Terrors and The Raven. That was fun. Route 66 was a gig.
All right, I think we have time for one last question from this gentleman over here.
Maybe not so much a question as a comment. I think we can have to close off by saying my favorite Boris Karloff moment in the movie, just to show you what a great actor he was, not just simply a horror film actor, but just such a great creative actor. Was in a little movie called The Devil Commands. If anybody's seen that one. But the one scene which absolutely puts me on the floor is when he has all these corpses sitting in this round table. He's got them hooked up to try and harness their spiritual energy to bring back the soul of his dead wife. And he's got this stuff, there's all this machinery is roaring. And sure enough, there's a knock on the door. So he has to run around, frantically shutting everything off. He's going to go to the door, but just as he does, he takes this one pause, and just to make everything totally normal, he smooths his hair back. That subtle little moment is just so brilliant, you know, and that's just how great it was.
Thank you.
Any last words?
Thank you all for coming, and if it weren't for the fans, I wouldn't be here, so thank you. I've had a wonderful time.
And thank you for joining us and being a huge fan. I appreciate you coming. And let's hear it for Sara Karloff.
Ladies and gentlemen, I need everyone who is here to evacuate the room so we can reset it for the people who are standing outside waiting.